All right. Hello, intro class. This is our EOE around the world presentation. My name is Michael.
My name is Kyle.
And I'm Josh.
All right. And we chose France as our country.
So we wanted to start by talking a little bit about demographics and lifestyle trends in France. One of those we're going to be talking about is how much time they spend on leisure and personal care activities. So according to a time use survey conducted by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, citizens in France spend an average of 16.36 hours per week on personal care and leisure activities. And this was the highest out of any country who had participated in the study. So the study itself did not specify what type of leisure activities these were, but according to a Britannica entry, as well as articles on Statista.com, most of these leisure activities are sedentary. So we wondered a bit why this was.
Some of those big activities have to do with the social nature of the French culture. French culture has a heavy focus on that social component. 82% of people, according to Statista.com, spend their free time interacting with others, whether that is through hanging out with friends, just catching up with them on like phone calls or FaceTimes or things like that, or interacting with people in other ways, just walking around. Their sedentary leisure tends to be quite intellectual. Things like reading is very common, whether that's like a newspaper, magazine, books, going to museums, spending time in cafes, or going to the cinema with your friends or other things like that, and as well as listening to music. Their popular recreation for their national professional sports, they have things like the French Open. That is a tournament that is held over 2 weeks. That is a tennis tournament outside of Paris. They also host the Tour de France, which is the most important biking race in the world. It takes place over 3 weeks and covers up to 3,500 kilometers. They also, as a biggest sport that they have in their country, they have French football leagues. There are a total of 7 different leagues and over 120 teams that are part of those leagues. Those range from professional teams to semi-pro and amateur teams. On the adventure sports side of things, it's mainly focused towards the south of France. There's lots of different things, and they're very regional dependent. Surfing takes place along the Atlantic coast, but primarily along the Mediterranean coast, where the sea is a little bit warmer. Then they also have mountain biking, which is extremely popular in the Pyrenees Mountains along the southwest of France, as well as the French Alps, which contains much mountain biking, as well as some of the best skiing and climbing in the world. Extremely popular destination for both of those activities. One thing that is quite particular and started primarily in France is Via Ferrata. Via Ferrata is kind of like a ropes course that's on a real rock face. The picture below on the bottom right corner, you can see people going through a traverse along the rock face. That's very common in Via Ferrata, as well as other things like a ladder that's bolted, or something like a cable bridge or something akin to that.
So the Britannia article that I had found suggested that part of the prevalence of these sedentary and intellectual leisure activities may be related to a lack of physical education provided to elementary age children in France. So I looked a little bit more into this and found some interesting statistics. Most health organizations would recommend that young children get 60 minutes of physical outdoor activity every day. According to the U.S. National Library of National Health, boys get 25% of this time, and French girls only get 11% of this time. So they're really missing on a lot of that like recommended daily activity. Instead, they engage into these sedentary and intellectual activities, and that's kind of how that becomes a part of the culture, as opposed to the things we have here, like Go Play 60 ads that I remember seeing as a kid. So I was interested to see if this lack of physical education would impact environmental education, and I was kind of surprised to see that it didn't. So environmental education is actually quite strong in France, and it's reflected in all the levels of their education. So in their primary schools, which are like what we call elementary schools here in the United States, in EE, there's an extra focus on that holistic element or that interdisciplinary element, because younger children engage less in compartmentalized learning and naturally approach things in a more holistic and interdisciplinary way. From a collection of EE lesson plans I found for primary school students, they seem to be super similar to ones that we had talked about in class, or even ones that we had created ourselves. So that was super interesting. I found one specific lesson that taught about greenhouse gases and photosynthesis by walking students through how to build their own greenhouse out of a shoebox. So the main goal of these EE lessons in the primary school level are to equip students with critical thinking and problem solving skills so that they are ready to face those issues as they go through their life. And this trend continues a bit into the secondary schools, EE, where there's kind of two ways that it goes. One is just through EE classes in regular secondary schools, which may look like a ecosystems class or an ecology class, and the others are through agriculture high schools, which are EE focused schools. Their main focus is to lead students towards being able to identify, prevent, and solve environmental issues, specifically those relating to farming. But more than just farming, they're also looking to get that collective good and the best outcome, which we talk a lot about when we talk about conservation. And these programs help build students towards lifetimes in EE, whether they continue their education or going directly into a career. These schools are focused around making people be able to better the world through conservation. So that's a little bit about EE in France.
Cool. So a little bit about the ecotourism in France. So the International Ecotourism Society defines ecotourism as responsible travel to natural areas that conserves the environment and improves the well-being of local people. So as we see all these small villages scattered throughout these like really cool natural areas in France, ecotourism is super, super popular. So I'm showing a map here of a lot of the popular national parks and other natural areas throughout France. So it's like super dense in the south, as Josh was saying, for the recreation. The south is super popular with like the adventure side. So France is home to about 10 national parks, and then all these other ones are kind of just other forests and like not national parks, but just other state land. So you can go to the next slide here. So then one really popular national park is Écrins National Park. It's the second biggest national park in France and is extremely popular for its scenic hiking and its interpretation because of its alpine setting. So this park is super well known throughout the outdoor recreation scene of France because of its renowned hiking and its renowned climbing. As well as it has mountain resorts that hug its northern border there. So we get a lot of people coming in from there. This park also is very popular with interpretation because it's home to so much different wildlife, including some rare wildflowers like the lady slipper orchid. And because of its high altitude, it's also home to cool animals like golden eagles, foxes, and even ibex deer, which were recently reintroduced in 1977. So those are super rare. And that brings a lot of like interpreters to the park. And then since there's not any major towns that border the park, a lot of the visitors will either stay in those resorts that we talked about or those small towns. Like I have one picture here, Embrun, France. It's a small town. It's really popular that people stay there. So that's like a huge source of income for that town. And there is our sources if you want to check out more about France. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, guys.